For nearly 2 decades, journalist Chris Hedges worked as a foreign correspondent in Central America, the Middle East, Africa, and the Balkans. Hedges was part of a team of reporters at the New York Times, awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 2002 for the paper's coverage of global terrorism. He's also received numerous accolades for his weekly column in Truth Dig, an online magazine. Hedges is the author of 11 books, including his latest work, Wages of Rebellion, The Moral Imperative of Revolt. Chris Hedges joins us now from New York. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's start with the election campaign. You say that what we are seeing now with the rise of people like Donald Trump is the revenge of the lower classes and the emergence of an American fascism. Explain that to us.
Well, we experienced a kind of corporate coup d'etat. It was started by the Reagan administration, but certainly propelled forward by the Clinton administration. We essentially saw government become captive to corporate power and serve corporate interests at the expense of the citizenry. A series of measures, starting with NAFTA in 1994, the destruction of the welfare system under Clinton, the deregulation of the FCC, the 1994 Omnibus Crime Bill that exploded the prison population, the destruction of the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act that created firewalls between investment and commercial banks and precipitated the financial meltdown. All of this reconfigured American society in quite dramatic ways. 50% now of the American citizenry lives virtually below the poverty line. Official poverty levels are about $24,500 a year for a family of 4. But most economists say that that's not even close to the real poverty rate. So 30,000 a year, 50% of the country below 30,000 a year. The unemployment figures are completely fictitious. As the Los Angeles Times has pointed out, it's probably closer to 17% when you count people who have stopped looking for work, or when you count people who have part-time jobs, that is 28 hours a week, but still fall below the poverty level and qualify for food stamps. So the stagnation with the economy, the kind of transference of wealth upwards, coupled with the assault on civil liberties, the destruction of privacy. I sued the president in federal court over Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act that overturns the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act on using the military as a police force, the decision by the Obama administration to assassinate American citizens. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And what we're seeing is a kind of revolt, because both parties have been complicit. Both the Republicans and the Democrats have transformed politics into what I would call anti-politics, into culture wars. The Republicans appealing to anti-abortionists, nativists, the Christian right. The Democrats, in their rhetoric, appealing to unions, minorities, traditional liberal elites, but both of them serving corporate power. And that's why you have seen the insurgency, or the insurgent campaign of Bernie Sanders, and the kind of renegade campaign by Donald Trump. So you're watching a rejection of the ideology of neoliberalism and a rejection of the established elites that carried out those policies.
Well, you mentioned Hillary Clinton. Let's take a listen to what she said recently on the campaign trail. And of course, Hillary Clinton is one of the leading candidates on the Democratic side. Let's watch.
I am not a natural politician, in case you haven't noticed, like my husband or President Obama. So I have a view that I just have to do the best I can, get the results I can, make a difference in people's lives, and hope that people see that I'm fighting for them and that I can improve conditions economically and other ways that will benefit them and their families.
Thank you.
So what she's telling us there, that she is the champion of the working classes, the underprivileged. Do you buy that at all?
No, she has been a close confidant of her husband since he was the governor of Arkansas, probably his chief advisor. She is running, in essence, in defiance of 30-plus years of public policy and political life. She was the senator from New York, by the way. She was the Secretary of State. So this kind of statement that somehow she is not rising up from the inner circles of power is completely disingenuous.
This election campaign, as we can see, is throwing up some strange alliances, strange coalitions. And if we look at what you just told us about Hillary Clinton, you look at what she said, the one group that has arguably borne the brunt of income inequality or the destruction of the welfare state here in the United States is African Americans. Yet they are supporting Hillary Clinton in droves.
Right. Well, what the Democratic Party did was speak in the language of multiculturalism and inclusivity and tolerance and diversity, and yet that economic assault against working men and women in this country was carried out regardless of where they came from or what their ethnicity was. So income, especially since 2008, for African-American families has fallen precipitously, I believe almost by 50%. Unemployment among black youth is about 50%. But what we've seen with the rise of the Trump campaign is the rise of white nativist groups that, because of the rhetoric, believe that they have been sold out in preference to marginalized groups within the society. And the rhetoric of the Democratic Party would seem to support that. In fact, it's not the case. I mean, everything was upended. So advancement for women or advancement for African Americans meant, having a woman CEO or having an African American president. It didn't mean advancing, poor women or certainly the African American underclass, two-thirds of which now are worse off than when King marched in Selma. So that plays very well with an enraged white underclass that hears that rhetoric, and Trump, of course, plays to that.
There is a question that Donald Trump often asks on the campaign trail, and let's for a moment forget about where this question is coming from. But the question is, he is always asked, what has President Obama done for blacks in this country? He is, after all, the first African-American president of the United States.
Well, that's a legitimate question because he hasn't done much. I think that, within African-American communities, there's obviously a sense of pride that finally, we do have an African-American president, and we shouldn't underestimate that. I think that African-American communities tend to be much more cynical about the process given their own historical experience. They tend not, as we have seen with Bernie Sanders supporters, who are a large component of them are young, college-educated, or kids who are in college. They tend to be much more skeptical about centers of power, and better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I don't think they're naive about the Clintons.
Bernie Sanders, of course, the other big Democratic candidate, has raised the issue of income inequality in his speeches and, of course, in an interview he did. Let's watch part of that interview.
What we have seen in recent years is a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%, whose percentage of wealth in America has doubled. We're talking about trillions of dollars going from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%. But for the last 40 years, what we have been seeing is a middle class disappearing, people working longer hours for low wages, and today, as it happens, 58% of all new income is going to the top 1%.
All right, that's a point you made at the beginning of the interview. Can Bernie Sanders or any one of the other candidates change that? How can there be a more equitable distribution of wealth in the United States?
Well, that's a very good question, because essentially you have corporate power that has seized, almost all systems of power, from legislative power, judicial power, executive power, media power, and it's certainly not going to be changed by a single person within the White House. I think one of the things that both Trump and Sanders have in common is that they acknowledge this economic inequality and the unfairness and injustice of it. Trump, talks about jobs and Carrier air conditioning, setting up a plant in Mexico, and he will tax Carrier 35% in order to bring their goods back in, and he's promised that, Apple will make its products in the United States rather than in China. Trump kind of reminds me of what anthropologists call crisis cults, and that is, when societies are in decline or are deteriorating, these figures rise up. We had it in Native American society with a ghost dance after, you know, the genocide against Native Americans. They would wear a certain shirt and the bullets wouldn't touch them, and if they did the dance, the buffalo herds would come back and the white people would go away and the dead warriors would rise up from the ground, etc. And Trump's kind of like that. He makes these promises, as you point out, that are just so disconnected from what is remotely physically possible, including building the wall. But I think that that's a kind of window into the despair that has gripped the white working class and much of the rest of the country as well. So all of the money, and remember, Jeb Bush raised $100 million for this campaign, all of the money of the oligarchs has not had a profound effect on this campaign because, and in fact, of course, the elite spent tremendous sums trying to discredit Donald Trump in television ads, and it didn't work. And I think that shows that the ruling ideology of neoliberalism is bankrupt, that it's just from across the political spectrum is no longer has any kind of efficacy or any kind of power. I don't think we've yet articulated what's going to take its place. Certainly not what Trump is proposing, and I think even when you listen to Bernie Sanders, he's pretty short on specifics as to how he's going to deal with the economic inequality and the suffering, which is very, very real.
If we look at the election right now and the way it's going, it seems very likely that American voters will have to choose between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. This is what the system has given us. This is how the system works right now. You talk in your book, Wages of Rebellion. The subtitle of that book is The Moral Imperative of Revolt. Is there an alternative way for people to express their political will then?
Well, there is, but unfortunately the only way left is for us to begin to carry out acts of civil disobedience, to defy the rules. You saw this after the police murder of Laquan McDonald in Chicago. People no longer got permits to march. Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, is beleaguered. I mean, he goes into schools, charter schools, and is booed by the students. So I think there is. We saw a Trump rally shut down in Chicago. That's not my preferred method of democratic direct democracy, but I don't think we have any other method left because, you know, Clinton certainly comes out of that establishment class which is detested. We have to remember that twice as many people are voting in the Republican primaries as in the Democratic primaries. Many of the people in the Republican primaries don't come out of the Republican Party. In fact, they really have no affiliation with any party. And I think that that combination of enthusiasm for a kind of non-party identified base that's angry and has every right to be angry, and the Democrats putting forward a candidate like Hillary Clinton who kind of epitomizes everything that people are striking out against is risky for the Democrats. I don't think we can discount, finally, that the Republican elites are quite determined to deny Trump the nomination in a brokered convention, however unfair that may be. And I think that it's not the racism, and the Republicans have spoken in coded racist language for a long time. But I think it's his assault against the establishment. Remember, he called George W. Bush a liar for the Iraq War, and his assault against corporatism and trade agreements, which, of course, is very dear to the corporate interests that control the two-party duopoly.